Welcome to the Determined Truth podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey everyone, welcome into this special edition of the Determined Truth podcast. Over the years, but especially over the last few months, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that we don't just talk about Bible and theology, but there's a cause that's very near and dear to Rob's heart, and that is justice issues, specifically of what's happening in the Middle East, and from a biblical perspective, what that looks like. So we're going to have a special guest on today, Jack Munayer. And so, Rob, why don't you go ahead and start and give Jack's bio, and then we'll go ahead and get into an amazing conversation that I'm really looking forward to.
Great. Yeah. So Jack was born and raised in Jerusalem to a British mother and a Palestinian Christian citizen of Israel father, Salim, a wonderful man, actually. I'm sure your mom's even better, by the way, right? Jack completed his BA in sociology and criminology from the University of York and an MA in human rights and transitional justice from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Jack currently manages the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel. Jack's main line of work has been focusing on human rights and humanitarian assistance. He is also acting in bridge building initiatives and advocacy platforms like Christ at the Checkpoint, the Jerusalem Belfast Initiative, and much more. So Jack, we just want to thank you for being here with us today, and thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Let's just begin by having you tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe your family, and then about the work that you do with EAPPI.
So my family here in Jerusalem, I'm one of four boys, and my ancestry, I guess, on the Palestinian side is from the city of Lydda, the ancient city of Lydda. And then on my mother's side, I'm British, and I grew up in Jerusalem very much in an interesting context in between both the Israeli community and the Palestinian community in Jerusalem. And so this is sort of where I thrive, I guess, in this sort of complex place. I'm married and I have two kids, two boys.
Wonderful.
And they're both asleep now. So I'm happy to be able to speak to you with some quiet.
Very good. Very good. Tell us about EAPPI then, and what it does and how it operates, and what your role specifically with them is.
So EAPPI is a program under the World Council of Churches. It began about 20 years ago. Actually, this year is the 20th anniversary of the program. And it began during a very violent period here in Israel and Palestine, the Second Intifada.
Right.
There was a lot of violence, a lot of human rights violations. And the Palestinian heads of churches, different bishops and patriarchs, came together and said, we would like to have a nonviolent Christian response to what we are seeing around us. And so a program was developed where internationals could come and visit here in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, Jericho, and basically stand at military checkpoints, shoulder to shoulder with Palestinians that were going through every day and were suffering all sorts of harassment by soldiers. And what was quickly discovered is that if you have an international just standing and watching the situation, the levels of violence, the human rights violations are reduced significantly. So since then, our program has expanded to accompany children to school through military checkpoints. We accompany children past settlements where they don't feel safe. We'll accompany shepherds and their sheep in areas where they might face harassment. And so we try to provide protective presence. We try to document incidents when they take place, so we have an accurate picture of what's going on the ground. And then we try to advocate. So each person that comes and participates in this program will spend some time advocating in their home countries about what they witnessed, about the different things going on here. And so that, in a nutshell, is the program. I oversee all the operations here in Jerusalem. So I manage our office and the staff, but our headquarters are in Geneva, Switzerland.
Hey, Jack, let's actually just back this up a little bit, because right there, there's so much stuff.
That was great. Yeah.
We have so many listeners who they're going to be hearing some of these things where they're going to be thinking like, what do you mean a military checkpoint? So living in the States, I live in California. And so when in California, we might talk about a checkpoint and we might think of something like the border between Mexico and California. And usually you don't have people going back and forth on a daily basis that like, you wouldn't have a kid from Mexico needing help going to school in America or vice versa. So this might be like maybe one of the images that we might have in the West. Why would there even be a checkpoint in a region where a kid would have to go through this checkpoint to get to school?
Sure. It's a fair question.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of military checkpoints within the West Bank, or what's oftentimes referred to as the Palestinian Territories. And Palestinians will have to go through these checkpoints in order to get to their work, to their schools. If they want to visit another Palestinian city, they will have to go through a military checkpoint. I suppose that on the Israeli side, it's seen as a protection measure in order to stop people that may want to cause harm. But in reality, what it does is it separates Palestinians from accessing basic services such as schools or visiting relatives. If you're going from Bethlehem to Ramallah, two Palestinian cities, you will have to go through multiple military checkpoints. And so many times, if you are going through this checkpoint, you are at the mercy of this soldier. Is he going to treat you nice today? Is he not going to treat you nice today? Is he going to let you through? Is he not going to let you through?
So is it pretty arbitrary like that in terms of like, you just don't know what you're going to get?
You have no idea. It's entirely dependent on the person on the day. So I'll just give you some examples. On some checkpoints that we monitor, if you get a bad soldier on that day, you could be turned away from work because they just don't feel like it. Some people that have come to us have said that they've been turned away from checkpoint because their shoes are too white or they're carrying too many sandwiches in their bag. And it's a system with no accountability. There's no way for a Palestinian to be able to try and find a remedy to these issues. So they cannot call a police or file a complaint, or at least not one that's going to be taken seriously. And so this is basically where we come in. And another point that I should add is that many children have to go through these checkpoints without an adult, without a guardian, because their parents might have to go through a different checkpoint in order to get to their work, and children have to go through a second checkpoint to get to school. And so these children are very vulnerable. So this is the role that we try to fill, is to at least have an adult sort of who's not in military uniform, who's observing and making sure that everything's okay.
Yeah, and this is, again, just to clarify, this is within your own territory, within your own essentially country or established region. The freedom of movement is just simply non-existent. That you have to go through to go to work from one city to another city within your own region, these checkpoints that are sometimes arbitrary. I went through the one in Bethlehem one time, and I said, I want to go through this one. And I realized later there was another line right next to it. And I think the other line was for internationals, but I wasn't sure. I thought, no, I need to go through this line and be with the people and just see what they're experiencing. And we're talking 5 a.m. so they can get to work in Jerusalem at 7 a.m. And Jerusalem's what, 5 miles away at the most from this checkpoint. And someone said to me, he said, we don't need human rights activists. We need animal rights activists, because we're just simply a bunch of cattle right now. And I was appalled at what I was experiencing. It was so grieving. And I know of others who've said that they live in Ramallah, and Jack, you can help me out. Ramallah is what, 20 minutes from Jerusalem, maybe, without checkpoints.
Yeah. Maybe even less.
Yeah, maybe even less. And they were Muslim. And they, on Friday is their holy day. So that's the day that they would go to Jerusalem. And he said, we sometimes we just wouldn't even go, because when there's a curfew and you have to be back by 6 o'clock or you get arrested, he said, we don't know if we're going to be able to get back by 6 o'clock, even though the services might end at noon. You're talking 6 hours to get through these checkpoints. And then you get arrested, and it costs $10,000, which is what I was told, to get out of prison. So this is just one fabric of life. So this is incredible, what you're saying. And can you imagine that? Can you tell us a little bit about the trauma that this brings upon a child who's going to school, for example, then?
Sure. Through our research, we have discovered that if a child is not accompanied and experiences a stressful situation at the checkpoint, they will not be able to study or function for the first few hours of their school. The first few hours of class are completely lost. And the teacher will say, there's just no point in trying to teach these kids. They've just been shouted at or yelled at by a person in uniform with a gun, yelled at in a language they don't understand. And it causes a huge amount of stress on the kids. In many cases, you will have an older sibling that has to take the younger siblings to school because the parents can't go with them. And so that normally older brother, will feel a huge amount of stress and pressure, a lot of psychosocial pressure in order to protect his younger siblings. In very conservative communities in the West Bank, families will simply not send girls to school if they're going to go through checkpoints and might face harassment. So simple things like having access to education without being harassed, without facing pressure and stress, simply doesn't exist for thousands of children. There are even schools that are attacked themselves by Israeli settlers, or soldiers will come to try and arrest children within the schools themselves.
Wow.
And you can imagine a class of kids, suddenly a military unit comes in and arrests 2 or 3 boys. It causes a huge trauma. So these are the type of things that we try to prevent direct and sort of the indirect consequences of the military occupation that is in control of many Palestinian lives.
What are ways, like tangible ways in which you do that? Is it just merely having an adult presence there, or is it, are you guys known as being, having a position in the community, or what makes, your organization special in terms of providing these services?
That's an excellent question. It's because the people who are standing at these checkpoints are internationals, right? Because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is also a battle of image, public image, and we care what you think. And so if a Palestinian adult will stand there, the soldier won't care how he behaves. But if an international stands there, you have to behave better. That international will document, will report what he sees or she sees. And that will have a big impact potentially on public opinion. We wear identifiable vests so that everyone knows, we're not just standing here, we're here to serve this purpose. If you've been turned away from the checkpoint, if you've been harassed, come to us. We will record what's happened to you, and that story will be shared. Otherwise, these stories would go completely unnoticed.
Yeah, I was going to mention that when people look at this particular conflict, they think it's Israeli versus Palestinian. And all reality, the average mom and dad in Israel and the average mom and dad in Palestine don't want this conflict at all. And they can get along. They have gotten along in the past, long before 1948. They lived side by side. But what happens then is and tell me what you think of this, or if I'm wrong here at all. Number one, you get 20-year-old kids as soldiers who are already a little bit terror-struck and awe-struck, and they've got this AK-47 or whatever kind of weapons they have, and they do feel concern, for terrorism, whatever it might be. But the real issue really becomes settlers, right? And the settler violence. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that means and what settlers are and why that's the area where the conflict actually is most intense?
This is a key point that is consistently misunderstood by a Western audience about what we experience here. It's not one side against the other, fighting over land. It's people that are living intertwined right next to each other. Within the West Bank, the area that is supposedly supposed to be the future state of Palestine, there are hundreds of thousands of settlers, Israeli Jewish citizens, living within the Palestinian territories. So there's overall, if I'm not mistaken, including the Jerusalem district, around 600,000 settlers. And so this is, in our opinion and the opinion of most of the international community, the main obstacle for peace, is that if there's going to be a future Palestinian state, you cannot have it like a slice of Swiss cheese, but there's all these islands of settlements. The settlements have continued to expand from their inception in 1967 until today. But this is also a state-sponsored initiative. It's
by the Israeli state.
Correct.
Yeah.
An attempt to stop any future Palestinian state from taking place.
By moving its population into the Palestinian territories, it de
Yes.
facto becomes Israel.
Yes, in many of the territories. So you'll have Israeli police stations, Israeli buses, schools, swimming pools. I mean, they
Yes.
function almost like any other Israeli city, but they're within the West Bank.
Right.
And this is a violation of international law. It's
Mhm.
against the Fourth Geneva Convention, which states that if you are occupying another territory, you cannot put your population in there.
Right.
So just to give you a quick example, when the United States invaded Iraq, there were not cities or towns of American citizens that were being established in Iraq during that occupation.
Right.
So that, in a sense, was an adherence to the Fourth Geneva Convention in that aspect. That's not what we experience here. So you have one side that's supposed to be a future Palestine, but it's full of Israeli Jewish cities, and many of these settlers are religious fanatics, radicals,
right,
who use violent methods in order to try and drive people out of their homes. They'll burn crops, they'll attack sheep, anything to intimidate the population to try and make them leave.
Right. I don't think on this podcast, Rob, I'm trying to think back when we've briefly talked about this, like with David Crump, when we reviewed his book. I think we talked about settlements a little bit, but I don't know if we've actually talked a lot about that. And that's not the point of this show. But could we just provide a little context on what this is? Because I know in my own church context, I'll have conversations with folks, and the average person has no clue what a settlement is or what this thing is. So like, Jack, you could be using language right now that our listeners are literally not knowing what you're talking about with a settlement like that. That's just a foreign concept to them.
Yeah, it would be good to have a map, I suppose.
I can put one in the show notes, or a link to one in the show notes.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So for those that do look at the map, the territory that is prescribed as the West Bank essentially was the division that took place after the first war that we had in 1948. And the international community agreed, okay, the West Bank and Gaza, this is going to be the future Palestinian state. Anything outside of that is going to be the state of Israel. And in 1967, after another war, Israel took effective control of all these territories. So until today, Palestinians cannot build an airport, cannot trade, cannot move without the permission of the Israeli military. So effectively, Israel controls all the land. And within this territory, east of the Green Line or east of the West Bank line, any Israeli Jewish town or city is a settlement. So if you're thinking of Tel Aviv, if you're thinking of Haifa or Beersheba, these are all Israeli cities. But if you hear places like Ariel or Elad, these are settlements.
Which are cities inside of the Palestinian, Israeli cities inside the Palestinian territories.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Rob, can you paint a picture of that, like contextualize that for our American audience, like maybe using a state or something like that?
It's like the United States invading Canada and attacking Canada, and then saying, we think you're a threat to us. And because you're a threat to us, we're going to continue our military presence in Canada. So now we're concerned for our well-being and our self-defense against Canada. And then what we do is we say, and what we're going to do is we're going to start taking people from Minnesota and moving them into Canada and putting cities, American cities inside of Canada to secure an American presence there. And what eventually happens is that we're never going to withdraw our military from Canada. We're actually just going to make Canada part of the United States.
And this is different. This is different than like when we might have an American military base in Germany or something, where there's an agreement where they say, hey, you guys can have this plot of land and you could do this. And there's national agreements. That's different than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Here.
And what happens then is because you have Israeli people living in Palestinian territories, those people are threatened. They've took somebody else's land, right? Mm-hmm. They stole somebody else's land or whatever it might be from a Palestinian. And now there's tension there. The Palestinians don't like it. Obviously, who would like it? And so now you have to protect them. So now that increases the military presence, and it increases. And what Jack was saying is there's two types of settlers. One are economic settlers. They move there because the government says, hey, we're going to give you a free home or a cheap home. And because you can't afford to live in Tel Aviv, it's too expensive. But there others are ideological settlers, and they're settlers who moved there because this is the land that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it's our land, and we're taking it back. We don't care what you say. And those are where you get the religious fanaticism now, who you're living in somebody else's land, you think it's yours, and there's tension, let's fight over it. And if I can make one more comment, Jack, when you mentioned the Swiss cheese, what we picture is, there's all these islands of Israeli cities around the Palestinian territories. But actually, the holes in the Swiss cheese are the Palestinian lands, because the Israeli settlements are connected to one another by roads and this infrastructure. And now to go from, that's why Jack was saying you have to go through a checkpoint, to go from one Palestinian area to another, you're passing through an Israeli road or another, the outskirts of Ma'al Adamim, a settlement. And then these settlers come down and meet you, and there's tension and there's violence. And that's where the most of the conflict is. And they'll go, oh, these Palestinians attacked, these Israelis. It was like, well, they attacked settlers who probably caused the problem last week, but we didn't report on that in the American news media. So, yeah, is that fair, Jack? Or
yeah, that's fair. This is actually one of the topics of my thesis in university, was about the road system. How there's roads that are for Israelis only, and Palestinians cannot use these roads. So you have to take really long bypass routes. Roads that are underdeveloped in order to reach a city that's 20 minutes away. It could take you an hour or longer. And so it's a whole matrix system of control and separation.
Yeah. I was in a settlement on one occasion, and our group was visiting a settlement, and the mayor of the settlement was kind of giving us this presentation. And his whole argument was, all right, we have this land, it's in Palestinian territory. Yeah, but it's our land. And his argument was this particular settlement was their land before 1948. So when the United Nations gave this land to the Palestinians, they gave Israeli land. And I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of Palestinian land on the other side of Israel, and they're not trying to get it back either. But so we were walking to the bus because we were going to take a drive around the settlement. So after a 1 hour presentation, we're going to take a drive around the settlement. He's going to show us the pools and the parks and the schools and the malls and everything else about the city. I stopped him. I said, okay. So if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that this land, which is on Palestinian territory, was actually your land before 48, and you don't think the United Nations has the right to give it to the Palestinians. He said, yeah, that's exactly right. I said, okay, what about the highway that is used to connect this city to the greater Israel, ultimately Tel Aviv, etc.? And he said, well, I said, isn't that on Palestinian lands? He's like, well, every country has a right to build an infrastructure. And I said, but it's not your country. You can't build an infrastructure on somebody else's country. Every country has a right to build. And he just kept reiterating the same line. We have a right to build an infrastructure on somebody else's within our own country. I'm like, but it's not your country. And it was an incredibly flabbergasting moment. I just couldn't believe. I was appalled, thinking, okay, there's Palestinian lands. I actually know somebody, Vinnie, up in Pleasanton, not far from where Vinnie lives, whose family land is now the Tel Aviv, is now Ben Gurion Airport. So they're Palestinians, and they have no hope of ever going back because their land is now underneath an airport. So, yeah. So, Jack, what are some of the biggest obstacles you face then, and that you encounter in this work that you're doing?
Well, now we have COVID, which is a huge.
That's right.
A huge obstacle for us. It's very difficult to bring internationals to be present here to accompany people. The program has not been functioning for the past year and a half until recently, where the airports opened up. And we saw a huge spike in harassment against people. People calling our office saying, when are the people coming back? We don't feel safe. We need to be accompanied. And just give you in numbers, in 2020, the amount of reported settler harassment, so settler violence against civilians, there were 358 cases. In 2021, there were 450, simply because there are no internationals there to monitor, to provide that protective presence. So that's one big obstacle. The second obstacle is from the settlers and soldiers themselves. They don't want the international community to know what is going on in the West Bank. So they will try to intimidate, try to restrict our ability to work, which is very difficult. And the context itself is very difficult. We're talking about places that experience consistent high levels of violence. It's not an easy job to stand at a military checkpoint It's not easy to accompany shepherds near a firing zone that the military uses that's on Palestinian land, because a lot of their military practice areas, they take Palestinian fields to do their military practices. So in that sense, these are just three quick examples of some of the obstacles that we face in just trying to implement the work that we do.
Wow. Now, when we're all done, I'm going to ask how people can get involved and kind of get active in this as well. But one of the reasons why I reached out to you was one of the Palestinian Christian people that I have come to know well is Dauod Nassar. And Dauod is just the living embodiment, in my opinion. And I don't know, Jack, you know him well. You're like, Rob, you can't have such glowing thoughts on him. I know who he really is. But I just look at this man and go, this man embodies the Christian life of suffering gracefully and lovingly. And he was recently attacked again. And can you kind of tell us a little bit about who Dauod is, what his story is, and fill us in? I don't think we actually have done a podcast on this at all. And then what happened to him recently and what's going on now?
So this is our friend Dauod Nassar. His family own land on the outskirts of Bethlehem, and they have sort of a hill where they have livestock, they have agriculture, all sorts of olive trees and different projects like that. And his hill is the last hill that has not been taken over by an Israeli settlement in the area. All the other hills that used to be owned by Palestinian families have all been taken over. And so his hill is completely surrounded by Israeli settlements. His access to the main road from this hill has been completely blocked off by the Israeli military. So you have to take these windy side roads in order to access it. And Dauod, along with his brother Daher and the whole family, have decided that they are going to approach this injustice, the restrictions against them, with, as you said, a Christian attitude of peacemaking, of nonviolence, of creative resistance. So in order to put pressure on them, the Israeli military will not allow them to build any structure on their
own land. Yeah.
So many times they will come and they will stay in caves that their great-great-grandfathers used to live in. That's how long the land has been owned by Daud's family. And unlike many Palestinians, Daud's family have managed to save a lot of documents proving that this land is theirs. So you had settlers come and attack Daud's farm in the past. You've had the military come and uproot their apricot trees and anything to put pressure on them not to leave this land and to build a new settlement on it. And recently Dauod had conveyed to me a concern that he's had is that he believes that some of the settlers are now cooperating with some Palestinians to try and help put pressure to remove Dauod and his family from this land. So the settlers have not managed to do it themselves. They haven't managed to do it through the military. So they said, okay, we're going to find some Palestinians. We're going to try and perhaps make a deal with them. What that deal is, we don't know. But this is a suspicion. This is not something that we know for a fact. And so Dauod was with his brother and they were tending the land, and they were attacked by, I think, about 12 to 15 masked people with knives and with sticks.
This is within the last 2 weeks, right?
This is within the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I suppose, there was an international there, a volunteer, who when she came out, basically all the people left because there's an international present, right? It's the same principle of what we've discussed beforehand. So both of them were hospitalized, Dauod and his brother. Dauod has been, he has now left hospital and he's recovering at home, but unfortunately his brother Daher was injured a bit more severely.
Oh, I didn't know
that. And we're really concerned for their safety, of course, but also for their land, their property. So for us in EAPPI, we are sending our international accompaniers to accompany different members of the family to make sure that they can feed the animals just for a few hours a day, and just to keep their eye to make sure that no one is is trespassing and taking over the land. So it's a heartbreaking situation for many of us that know the resilience of the family, the amazing attitude they have in the face of injustice. And so we're trying to support them in this way. But I know that they've also been sharing things on social media. I would really encourage everyone to look for Attentive Nations on their different social media platforms to stay up to date.
All right. I'll put the link for that in the
there's one there's a Facebook group, I think, because Attentive Nations is Dauod's organization, right?
Right. I think for those who are listening, Vinnie and I recorded last night, which we won't post for another couple of weeks, kind of an overview on the Sermon on the Mount. And we start with, blessed are those who mourn. And I think this is exactly what it means. It's you weep and you mourn when you hear of injustice like this, no matter who it's happening to, Israelis or Palestinians or Muslims or Christians or Jews. But when you see a brother and sister and his family in Christ and whatever, so now we'll definitely be praying for Daher even more so. And it's this, if you hear his story and read his story, unbelievable. And they've been going through this since 1991 in particular as well. So all right, how can we find out if someone hears this podcast and says, hey, maybe I'm a college student or I'm a young adult or whatever, or I'm a retiree or whatever. I've got 3 months on my hands or 1 month. I don't know how long they can come over and do these accompaniment programs. How do they get involved? Can you give us information on that? And maybe I'll share the links or some links if you might have them as well in the show notes so they can get involved with that. But can you speak to that a little bit, Jack?
Sure. With the groups that we have that come for 3 months, we have people come from around 11 or 12 different countries. So on our website, which is EAPPI.org, you can find your contact person in your country to ask about how you join the program, what's it like, what are the requirements. And then you could come and accompany someone like Dauod or families like Dauod who are desperately in need of protection.
Wow. And do you need like a visa to come over, or like what are the requirements that you would need in order to just enter the country?
Well, before you would even think about a visa and entering the country, you have to be trained. You have to be trained in the principles of nonviolent accompaniment. You have to become, we have to trust that when you come and you see all sorts of difficult situations, that you're going to be able to handle it, that you have an interest, you have a passion for Israel and Palestine. It's a huge opportunity to build relationships with people that you would normally not reach or not hear about in the media. And so there's a whole training and application process beforehand. And then you would come simply at the invitation of the heads of churches. So the churches invite you to come and witness, to come and accompany the church and Palestinian communities. And it is an issue that we have faced at the airport, where at times people have been turned away. But overall, we are successful in having people come and access. We have people from the United States, from Canada, most of Western Europe, from Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador and Colombia, from South Africa. I mean, we really have a united group of people from different backgrounds to come and say that we don't agree with this. Now, not everyone that participates in this program is Christian. In fact, I would say that most of the people that participate would describe themselves as non-religious. But they agree to uphold the values of EAPPI. There's a theology behind what we do, and we try to build that in parallel to the language of human rights and international law.
Wow, fantastic! And you're allowed in Israel for 3 months without a visa, as long as you can get past the airport. So I'm sure you guys.
I mean, you will get a visa, but
that's what I mean. Yeah. Upon entrance. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that we've missed that you want us to make sure we know about, or our listeners hear about?
I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. I know that it feels like a very complicated situation, but having conversations like this is the first step to knowing and understanding. And I would encourage everyone who's interested in this topic to continue to explore it, whether it's the geopolitical map of Israel-Palestine, or whether it's what we as Palestinian Christians are trying to do, trying to support our communities here. So just very grateful for your time and for everyone that's listening.
And even right there, just how you're ending the thing, Palestinian Christians, which that might seem like an oxymoron to many of us in the West, because the Palestinians are the bad guys. They're the Muslims who want to kill us. And it's like, no, this is a much more complex situation than we've been told from our news outlets.
Absolutely. We have a very small, we're less than 2% of the population here as Palestinian Christians, but we're active, vibrant part of the society here. My family have been Palestinian Christians for at least 800 years. We see our presence, the different work that we do, as a continuation of the Gospels, as it were, a continuation of the work that Jesus brought for his disciples here in this land. And so we're oftentimes not heard of, and that's intentional. People, it's very easy for people to imagine this as a clash of civilization, West versus Islam, Jews versus Muslims, but the reality is more complex. And if you keep it like a Star Wars film, it's goodies versus baddies, right? But when you're talking about real humans, about real people, you have to think twice.
Yeah, it's just this American way of thinking, though. I remember someone said to one of the Palestinians, "So how long has your family been Christians?" And their response was, somewhere between the book of Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 5. So it's like, yeah, we were the first ones, right? The church that you're reading about in the book of Acts, that's my family. And what's interesting in there, one of the great books that was written, is called Blood Brothers by Elias Shakur. And his whole point is Palestinian Christians could be very well descended from the Jewish converts to Christianity in the first century at the time of Jesus. This is not what we think it is. So yeah, thank you so much for taking your time. And wow, I'm just so amazed at the work that you're doing. And your mom did a great job raising you. I'm not sure how much your dad helped to do that, but tell him I said hi. Anyways, and I hope that I can get back to the land sometime soon, and we can get together and have some Arabic coffee. So
Ahlan wa sahlan. You'll be most welcome.
Yes, wonderful. And if you ever come to the States, of course, please look us up, and we're happy to host you and also. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. I know if no one else enjoyed that, Rob and I enjoyed that. Yeah. That this shapes the trajectory of my day. But Jack, great meeting you. Please, everyone, check out the show notes in the podcast. A lot of times we don't look at those, but scroll up on your podcast app, look at all the links that Rob provided for this episode, and show how you could get involved and just learn more about this very important topic. But we thank you for listening. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Please subscribe to and like our podcast. You can follow Rob's blog at determinetruth.com or purchase his books on amazon.com. See you next time.